Hi, welcome to Pamela Price Unfiltered. I'm Pamela Price, your host. This is a space and the place for real talk. This podcast is all about raw, unfiltered conversations about law, politics, culture, education, systemic racism, and current events shaping our world. We'll go beyond the headlines to dive deep into how some of the most pressing issues are impacting real people, real families, and our communities. My goal is to help you navigate the complexities of our world. Each episode will tackle an important issue, breaking it down in a way that's honest, actionable, and informative. We'll hear from community leaders, lawyers, activists, educators, healers, and everyday people on the front lines of change. For those tuning in for the first time, I'm Pamela Price, a longtime attorney, political activist, and champion for justice. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to my YouTube channel and to my Substack channel to get the weekly word. Your support keeps the conversation raw and unfiltered, and you can listen to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. So welcome to the show. Let's talk about it. Today's episode is a powerful one. Today, I am joined by two extraordinary guests whose lives and leadership have reshaped the way we talk about redemption, reentry, and the systems that have often failed our communities. First, we welcome Barbara Becnel, a trailblazer in criminal justice reform, a respected journalist and author, and a voice who has never been afraid to speak truth to power. Barbara became a global figure through her work with Stanley Tookie Williams, co-founder of the Crips, who transformed his life behind bars and was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Together, they co-wrote a children's book series urging youth to stay away from gangs and violence and launched a clemency campaign that captured international attention. Barbara also co-produced the acclaimed film Redemption, the Stanley Tookie Williams story, which shed light on both Tookie's transformation and the injustice of California's death penalty system. But Barbara's impact goes far beyond advocacy. She recently earned her PhD, Dr. Barbara Becnel, from the University of Edinburgh, where her research dives into how death row became a twisted symbol of heroism for young gang members, challenging the very foundation of criminology as we know it. Whether in the classroom, courtroom, or community, Barbara brings bold intellect and deep humanity to every space she enters. Joining her is Antwon Cloird, a truly hometown hero out of Richmond, California. Antwon's story is one of raw truth, redemption, and resilience. After battling addiction and incarceration, he committed to turning his life around. And just this past year, with neighborhood friends and community leaders and elected officials, he celebrated 21 years of sobriety. That milestone wasn't just a personal achievement. It was a celebration of community, of second chances, and of the people who walk with you through the fire. Antwon's recovery began in Narcotics Anonymous, where he learned in his own words that drugs weren't the problem, he was. And through that process, he transformed his pain into purpose. Today, Antwon is known across the Bay Area for his hands-on work on reentry, recovery, housing advocacy, and trauma-informed care. He shows up for people that others have forgotten. He lifts up those that the system wants to leave behind, and he brings lived experience, integrity, and compassion to every room that he enters. His story has been featured in the East Bay Times, where he was celebrated as a hometown hero, and the Indy Bay. He is the founder of Men and Women of Purpose, a singular reentry organization in Contra Costa County, and he continues to lead by example, reminding us all that freedom from active addiction is possible and that everyone deserves a second chance at a first-class life. Together, Barbara and Antwon bring deep insight, lived experience, and an unwavering commitment to building a world where redemption is real, justice is personal, and healing is possible. So let's get into this conversation. As always, we're keeping it unfiltered. So welcome, Barbara and Antwon. Thank you for joining us on Pamela Price Unfiltered.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Ms. Price,
Of
for inviting
course.
us.
You both have dedicated your lives to the idea that people can change, that redemption is not just possible, but necessary. How has your personal and your professional work and challenged public narratives about who deserves a second chance? And how does that belief in redemption shape the reentry work that you do today? And so I know that's a lot of different questions, but I'm going to start with Barbara and open it up. Barbara, you have helped lead a global clemency campaign for Stanley Tookie Williams. And, Antwon, you've walked the road of reentry and recovery yourself. So let's talk about it. Barbara, let's start with you.
Well, it, the whole notion of redemption was really introduced to me by my work that I did with Stanley Tookie Williams, who was on death row. And when I first went to meet him, one of the first things he said, or certainly within an hour of interviewing him, he said to me, "I've changed. I want to write books for kids to get them not to follow in my footsteps, and I want you to help me do it." And what was interesting was that I walked in a Miss Middle Class who had no real understanding of what Stanley's life had been. And I went away and I said, "Let me think about it." And I thought, I did like a moral assessment and came to the conclusion that if he could make a difference in the world and he was sincere in doing that, then I wanted to jump in and I wanted to help him. And that moral assessment, because he's on death row, so do I really want to have my name affiliated with him? And the answer ultimately was yes, and that I would take whatever licks I had to take in order to help him change a whole nother generation from following in his footsteps. So that is how I came to begin to understand redemption. So I'll stop there because I'd love to hear what my colleague has to say about that.
Mr. Antwon, otherwise known as Dr. For Real, tell us for your journey. Give us your take on redemption, reentry, recovery.
Well, I'd share that I am who I serve. Lived experience is real. A lot of people can go to college and get degrees about addiction, second chances, prison mentality, behavior, but it's the difference when you overcome it yourself. And then you can identify with people's pain, guilt, shame, and misery. And for 35 years, I was an addict. I never went to prison, but I went to jail for years, for a few years, but spread it out. And sometime I was not arrested, I was rescued. I was rescued from my behavior, and I sat down. But when I got clean, so I always pay homage to those who crossed me over. And Miss Becnel was one of my she roles because she was over neighborhood house when I came in 20 years ago to get clean. She was the director of neighborhood house, and I watched her. She was running for governor, dealing with Tookie and other community stuff. And then I got involved, and she allowed me to have my first office with Men with a Purpose at Neighborhood House. And so I pay homage to her. I thank her for her leadership and guidance. And I moved on. And like I said, everybody deserves a second chance, but what does it look like? Everybody is not in a box. Everybody's need is different. Everybody's vicarious trauma. I may use words that people don't understand, but vicarious trauma is learned behavior over time, and you're traumatized of the behavior. And what does normal look like in the Black community? It shouldn't have to be. You shouldn't have to go to prison to have the right to passage.
So, Antoine, you mentioned in your introduction, or I mentioned the founding of Men and Women of Purpose and the reentry work that you did. And we brought you to Alameda County to help with reentry. But tell my audience what led you to found Men and Women of Purpose, and what did you do there?
Okay, so Proposition 36, 47, and 57, and all the rest of the proposition bills of reentry came into play in 2014, 13. We sat in the room for 18 months dealing with the definition of recidivism and programmatic services in the reentry, building of reentry. And I sit there at that table with a bunch of other county people, faith-based leaders and everything, and we came up with the package to do it. And so, moving fast forward, sitting in that room, I knew that they couldn't do that work because they didn't have the heartbeat of the people. I did, and I knew how recovery changed me and how the opportunities that I was engaged to, and so I formed it after me. I formed Man and Woman of Purpose after me, and it worked. And we had a contract with the sheriff. John Joy, our board of supervisors, gave us a contract because they didn't give us no money. When they chopped up $27 million, they didn't even fund us, and we was in the jail for 2 years for free. And so we were able to get an opportunity to get a contract to the sheriff, and they're still, and the organization is still in the county doing work to this day. So everything I build turns into gold because
So,
I put myself into it.
what did you learn about the barriers that people returning home from prison actually face?
So my life was, like I say, I am who I serve. I just look at my whole being and the tables that I sat at. I sat on the board of alcohol and other drugs for 15 years. In that board, I sit on another board of the Mental Health Commission. I sit on that board for another 5 years. And the things I heard, uh, we didn't get in our community. And that was the thing that I shared with Dr. Becnel was if you're not assessed, they don't address you. We were addressed through mass incarceration, and through mass incarceration to me was a form of slavery. If you our lives, the school to prison pipeline that they called it back in the 80s was real because they if they don't give you the economic, the education, and the resources, you're going to do illegal activities to feed your family or to do what you need to do to survive. But the system was based on coming to lock you up for trying to survive because they never created the opportunities. And so it formed this thing. This acronym I came up with was called HIV, Hood Infected Virus, that causes addictive incarceration death syndrome, because the path leads to what our kids are exposed to as youngsters: the domestic violence, the fighting, the guns, the drug use. They normalize that and then they mimic it. I mean, how we go from 30 years of love music to now we thug music to killing folks and defiling our women. I mean, it's you just see the whole dynamics of it. And so, but if you don't know you're sick, you don't know how to get well. So health and wellness is real, but first we have to assess the community, then address the issues and give them resources to get well.
Dr. Becknell,
Yeah,
tell
I was
us,
just
how
going
do
to
you?
ask. Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry. I was just going to ask my colleague, could I just jump in here for a minute?
go ahead, take the
All
jump.
right.
Yeah, we
Thank
want to
you.
hear from you.
Well, I want to bring it back even to Stanley Tookie Williams and what Dr. For Real just shared with us. And one of the things that he told me was, even within the prison system, he said, because he was addicted to PCP at the time of his arrest. But at any rate, he said his redemption, he had to figure it out himself. He had to carve his own way. He said there was no help offered to him for all of those years that he had been in prison. So he says the redemption that he did manage to manifest, it was because he had to work on himself. And um and so that gets to what you were saying about no assessment, um no effort to really provide the proper help and proper assistance. But then that gets to the next point that I want to make, which is that's part of what we have to work on. We have to not only work on ourselves, as Stanley Tookie Williams said he did, and as you did, but we also have to make the system work. We cannot let the system off the hook. We can't let them off the hook because the system has created um, the circumstances that then press us into the trauma that then and you Antwon have some interesting ways that you explain how you go from trauma to where you end up with your rhyming words. So you can help me and jump in and give me the rhyme that really gives it in a succinct
We
way.
make trauma, we normalize our trauma.
Yeah, and that's a
We
pretty
make trauma look
profound
normal.
statement.
That's very profound.
Go ahead. That's a profound
So,
statement.
so when we look at the words, when we look at historical words that they use in the mental health field, vicarious trauma is a learned behavior and acceptance of violence. If that's infamous, it's like when violence is implemented there is as a child, I remember that yell, that holler, I caught a feeling. You know what I mean? I felt something that wasn't right and I couldn't expound on it, so I had to suppress that feeling. And these kids today, they have suppressed so many feelings that they only can find love outside their homes, or somebody would accept them outside because their homes are so toxic. You know what I mean? They come up with their homework. If the parents are not educated, they're suffering through domestic violence. They're suffering through drug addiction themselves. So they cannot really give the child the nurturing that they need. And so this child, I'm talking about little Pookie. You got little Pookie, little Ray Ray, little Nook Nook, and little Half Dead. That's 4 generations of kids that with no information. That's a train wreck for the future. You know what I mean? And you see the behaviors manifested in this generation now because they're looking at prison as a rite of passage. They're looking at going to jail for life without parole as a rite of passage, robbing themselves and the people who are teaching them this behavior, sending them out on the lick or the hustle is responsible for them when they get them sentences and they don't want to take accountability for their wrongs.
Right. And
So,
let me just jump in on that. One of the first things that I came to learn is how in North Richmond, when I was running neighborhood house, was the terrible condition that the local elementary school was in at the time when I got there. And first of all, so let's talk about mass incarceration. I interviewed a fifth grade class when I first got there. 92%, 92% of those kids had a primary person from their family in prison. 92%. Now, what I also learned is that the teachers that they were sending to that elementary school were the teachers who hadn't performed and hadn't done well in other schools. So those kids who showed up with the trauma at home, and also now they show up in the classroom and they don't have the best opportunity even within the classroom. And so, you know, and when 5 years from now or 8 years from now they're in prison, everybody forgets all of these conditions, the steps that got them, the what's the phrase for it? The pipeline from from the schools in North Richmond across that bridge right into San Quentin. So I started doing some work to try to fix the school, but that gets back to what I was saying. We have to also be mindful of what must change with the institutions that contribute to the trauma.
so Barbara, talk about how your work with redemption and your understanding of the HIV as you've been articulated by Dr. Cloird has coalesced for you in your PhD work and in your international work.
Yeah, well, as I decided after all these years to go back to school and get the PhD, what became clear to me is back again, tracking the process that leads to the trauma. So what happens is at the academic level, the scholars create research. Now I'm going to get back to the research in a minute. They create research. And when you talk about toxic conditions, let's apply that word to what can happen in academia. where there is toxic research. And it's largely based on almost all of the same issues that they show up at almost every level of the process of privilege and of a lack of understanding of the people that they are supposedly doing the research about, or and who they don't really understand, and the research doesn't turn out to be valid. So, but here's the trajectory. Research that then goes to governments and legislatures to create policy informed by erroneous research. And then the policy gets translated into erroneous programs that won't work because they don't have an Antwon to say no, no, no. They don't have a Barbara in the research arena to say no, no, no. That's not the proper research. And then the research, so the research becomes the policy becomes the programs, and the programs end up creating the trauma. They either don't work or they hurt. They actually hurt. So what I have been doing, so once I saw that, I have been working to create cognitive change, to change the system at that very basic level when the first friggin' idea comes up as to how do we help folks? How do we help the gang members? How do we? Well, I get on top of that, and I've created actually new theories and new, because I told my PhD supervisors what existed was inadequate. That's the word I used. It was inadequate, and it needed some new. We need some new theories, and I'll create them so that somebody coming behind me has something to use that's better than what has been used, and that can maybe lead to better research, better policy, better or informed research, informed policy, informed programs that can create actual real change. So at the institutional level, I'm really dealing with actually several layers of institutions, but they really are impacted by this first root cause. And that is how the academic world decides to think about racism, decides to think about Black men, decides to, and what they say that Black men should be, how they should behave, and what they believe that Black men believe, that they don't even know, but they write it as if they know. And so I have been fighting that, and actually fairly successfully. by after about 4 years into this process, I got people to listen to me, and I'm getting people to accept my publications where I don't compromise my message. But at any rate, the idea is we have to change every institution that is impacted by racism and that creates trauma. We have to just go right along the whole process and get it to change. Okay, now I want to I call him an organic intellectual. Now let me explain that for a minute. There is a very famous Italian. So I don't know if I even told you this part of why I call you an organic intellectual, but there's an Italian scholar who was a rebel and ended up in prison for umpteenth many years for being a rebel against dictatorship. And his name was Antonio Gramsci. And he came up with a whole analysis of what traditional scholars have done to hurt the world, which is my little shorthand version of wrong theory, wrong policies, wrong programs, and traumatized people. So that's my shorthand version of Antonio Gramsci saying traditional intellectuals have been sent out into the world to represent the moneyed powers that be. And whoever gets hurt in the process of that, it's, oh, well. But he says, but the people from the community, they're just as smart. And they become, especially the leaders, they are the organic intellectuals. And they now are coming from the people, from the community, from the streets. And they have some answers. And so my colleague Antwon, I have told him and named him an organic intellectual. And I absolutely mean it with his brilliant insights. So I'm ready to listen to some more brilliance. Okay, go ahead.
Well, Malcolm X had said it best. Plymouth Rock, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. And you look at our communities, when he said that he saw drugs, he saw no opportunities, economic, the development, everything was low in the black communities. Crime was up, but drugs was, that's when, the heroin epidemic was going crazy in the black communities. And he saw it. And the only person who was benefiting off that was the system. And so, you know, at my time, we had the highest murder rate per capita in Richmond, California. And at that time, it was a lot of people being killed by homicide. So, I just want to just close with this. When Dr. Becnel was talking about the assessments and stuff like that are new policy, right? Richmond was the number one person that UC Berkeley Stafford would come and do evaluations on in the black community around our anger and our violence. And it made a lot of money through the Crime Prevention Act that came out of the violence, came out of our community, but we never benefited from it, healing ourselves with services, proper services in our community. So thank you for letting me share that.
Dr. Becnel, you want to close us out?
I do. And what I want to do is invite all of you, all of our listeners, anyone who hears this, to invite this team of an a genuine organic intellectual and a traditional scholar, that we have. These are some very interesting issues and important issues that need to be discussed in a way that they're not typically discussed, and from different perspectives that they're not typically looked at. And we can do that. And so anyone who wants to reach out to us and invite us to come speak at your university or at your community group organization, we are available to do so, and hope to hear from quite a few of you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Becnel, and thank you, Mr. Antwon Cloird, the organic intellectual, the activist at the table, the king of reentry and of second chances. Thank you both so much for coming to Pamela Price Unfiltered and sharing your perspective with my audience. In the spring of 2024, as the elected district attorney, I exposed a scandal of epic proportions in the Alameda County justice system. For at least 28 years, Alameda County prosecutors violated the United States and California constitutions by excluding Black and Jewish residents from death penalty juries. They also appear to have used the death penalty as the harshest possible punishment for Black defendants based on their race. This certainly is consistent with what we found, the use of the special circumstances against Black defendants, bringing the harshest penalties on young Black men, life without the possibility of parole. The story begins with a prosecutor named James Anderson. In 1980, Anderson became the first Alameda County prosecutor to win a death penalty case after the United States Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976. Jack Anderson, by the time he retired in 2004, he boasted that he had personally sent more people to death row in California than any other prosecutor in the country. In 1991, John Meehan, district attorney, assigned James Anderson to lead the Alameda County District Attorney's death team. So, from at least 1980 through 2004, we believe that James Anderson influenced every death penalty case in Alameda County. His office mate for many years during that time was another seasoned prosecutor named Jack Quatman. Quatman had been a career prosecutor who also, for many years, took pride in sending Alameda County residents, many young black men, to death row. The exception for Jack Quatman was his first case, that of Fred Freeman. Mr. Freeman was tried and convicted of murder involving a robbery and sentenced to death in 1987. Quatman felt that Fred Freeman's case never should have been a death penalty case because he felt that Freeman wasn't that bad a guy. He compared Freeman's case to other shootings at the time, but it wasn't his call. It was James Anderson and District Attorney John Meehan's call. In 2005, Jack Quatman blew the whistle on James Anderson, John Meehan, and a famous Alameda County judge, Stanley Gold. Gold was an icon in Alameda County in the 1980s and the 1990s. He served until 1998. Even when I became district attorney in 2023, Gold was still a revered figure in our office. His son, Matt Gold, hired by District Attorney John Meehan in the early 1980s while his father, Stanley Gold, was still on the bench, still worked in the office when I got there. In 2005, Quatman testified under oath that Judge Stanley Gold had counseled him to remove all of the Jewish jurors from Fred Freeman's jury, and he did. Jack Quatman also testified under oath that it was a practice of the DA's office to remove all Jews and black people, especially black women, from death penalty cases when the defendant was black. There was also evidence presented at the hearing in 2005 that Quatman had taught other prosecutors from around the state to follow that rule if they wanted to win their cases. Why was this claim so explosive in 2005? Because it's illegal, unconstitutional, and a violation of every prosecutor's ethical duties. Not only is it cheating the system, it is prosecutorial misconduct of the worst kind because it involves the death of another human being. In 1978, in People v. Wheeler, the California Supreme Court stated, "The American system requires an impartial jury drawn from a cross-section of the entire community and recognizes that eligible jurors are to be found in every stratum of society. Any system or method of jury selection which fails to adhere to these democratic fundamentals, which is not designed to encompass a cross-section of the community, or which seeks to favor limited social or economic classes, is not in keeping with the American tradition and will not be condoned by this court." In 1986, in Batson versus Kentucky, the United States Supreme Court made it the law of the land that it is unconstitutional to eliminate jurors based on their race. But in June of 1992, at a statewide training class for prosecutors, and again in court in March of 2005, Jack Quatman disclosed that Alameda County prosecutors had, in fact, been violating the Constitution to discriminate against Jewish residents, black residents, and black defendants on the basis of race and religion. So in 2024, we had to determine who knew what when and how many bad apples had spoiled the barrel. We looked at all the death penalty cases where the defendant was still alive. According to the New Yorker magazine investigation, there are more than 600 people still with death sentences in California, more than in any other state. 34 of those living defendants were prosecuted by the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. The person at the heart of the scandal was James Anderson. Based on his own notes, his public comments, and the results based on a review of his jury selection in death cases, it did not take much to conclude that Mr. Anderson's actions violated the California and the United States Constitutions. But in 2005, the District Attorney's Office circled the wagons and, under the leadership of then Deputy District Attorney Morris Jacobson, attacked Jack Quatman. Quatman was a top gun in the DA's office for decades. He served in the DA's office for 25 years. He shared an office with Anderson on the ninth floor. He and Anderson reported directly to Chief Assistant Tom Orloff and District Attorney John Meehan. He recruited or represented the District Attorney's Office at CDAA, California District Attorneys Association conferences across the state, training other prosecutors from around the state. In 1998, Jack Quatman left the District Attorney's Office and moved to Montana. When he blew the whistle in a failed effort to save Fred Freeman's life, his former colleagues turned all the way against him. No less than 8 current or former prosecutors lined up to trash Jack Quatman in court, calling him unethical and untrustworthy. DDA, Deputy District Attorney Morris Jacobson, headed up the DA's defense team and sent DA investigators to Montana to, quote, dig up dirt, close quote, on Quatman. According to one of the inspector's notes, District Attorney Jacobson made it clear that they were not supposed to document their activities just in case. The district attorney's office paid for lawyers from Montana to come and testify to trash Quatman's character with what the New Yorker magazine described as petty complaints. 6 days before Jack Quatman testified in court, James Anderson admitted to a New York Times reporter that the office did exclude many prospective jurors, including Jews and blacks, because of their backgrounds, professions, and political beliefs. According to James Anderson, it wasn't because of prejudice, but it was because, quote, their politics are not going to be on your side, close quote. Predictably, the court ruled against defendant Freeman, found that Quatman's allegations about Stanley Gold were not true, and that Quatman was dishonest and unethical. Fred Freeman died in prison 4 years later in 2009 at the age of 69. Fast forward to 2024, and we found notes in numerous death penalty cases, files identifying Black and Jewish jurors, belittling them based on their race and their religion. Most of the notes from Anderson's cases were mysteriously missing from the files. The notes we did find implicated Anderson, Kenneth Burr, Colton Carmine, Morris Jacobson, and of course, Judge Stanley Gold. Both Jacobson and Burr had also gone on to become judges in Alameda County. Their supervisors, whom we believe were aware of their misconduct, included District Attorneys John Meehan, Tom Orloff, and Nancy O'Malley. When the New Yorker magazine confronted Anderson with the notes and the evidence to confirm Jack Quatman's allegations of prosecutorial misconduct in 2024, Anderson claimed that prosecutors were told to purge their files because of the office's limited storage space, as an explanation for why his files had been purged. He also claimed that I was undoing the hard work that they had done because of race, claiming that I was only trying to undo the cases of Black defendants. Not only was that not true, but in the Curtis Irvin case, the California Attorney General's office conducted a comprehensive review of Mr. Anderson's jury selection practice and concluded on its own that Mr. Anderson had violated the United States Constitution and that Mr. Irvin was entitled to a new trial, which the court granted. When I was recalled in 2024, state bar and judicial misconduct complaints were pending against 7 former members of the Alameda County District Attorney's Office based on the notes we found. These lawyers are still alive and some are still practicing in Alameda County. Even those that have passed on, their living legacies are in the DA's office. Matt Gold, the son of Stanley Gold, who left the office after the scandal broke in 2024, was recently rehired by the new district attorney. DA John Meehan's son, James Meehan, who was hired by his father 38 years ago, is still in the office. In 2024, we found 11 deputy district attorneys hired by District Attorney Tom Orloff, whose parents either served as deputy district attorneys or they were judges in the Alameda County Superior Court. During the dark era, when by James Anderson's own admission, quote, we could There was nothing we couldn't get away with, close quote. Now that the old guard is being restored to power in Alameda County's justice system in 2025, the question the public should ask is whether a few bad apples spoiled the whole barrel. Are the days when Alameda County prosecutors and judges willfully violated the Constitution truly over? Or is the desire to return to the good old days leading us back to a dark place riddled with injustice? As someone once said, history may not repeat itself, but it rhymes often. Thank you for tuning in to Pamela Price Unfiltered. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and please sign up this month as a founding member of our Substack newsletter to get the weekly word from Pamela Price Unfiltered. Your support keeps the conversation raw and unfiltered. And you can listen to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you.